I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the podcast where we say, okay, have you heard of that celebrity memoir? We'll give you more than just the celebrity memoir. We'll tell you also our analysis of that celebrity memoir. If you say, no, don't give me more, give me less, I want to read Demi Moore on my own, go do that. But if you want to hang out with us, move forward. Claire?
You know what I've been doing?
Tuning out entirely.
Kind of. I've been listening to other podcasts. First of all, great. I love that. I really like listening to podcasts. Good stuff.
Cool. I'm glad we've dedicated several years of our lives now to making a thing that you think has legs.
I don't know. I don't have good taste. Who cares what I like?
Totally.
But you know what a lot of other podcasts do?
Huh.
They introduce each other. So I would sit down and go, hi, Ashley Hamilton.
Oh, hi, Claire Parker.
That to me is confusing. Say your own name, right?
Yeah, I actually don't know if I've ever. Claire Parker felt very weird to say just now. I've never done it before.
That's interesting because I do think I'm a two-named person.
To me, your first name is my friend and your last name is Claire. So when I reference you to other people, I say, oh, you know my friend Claire.
My friend is a honorific.
Exactly. Sometimes I say my best friend Claire. Sometimes I say my best friend and business partner. But I don't know that Parker comes out of my mouth often.
Yeah, you're saying it like it's dripping in venom.
It is not venom. It's more like it's like getting stuck somewhere. It's not flowing.
Yeah. Anyway, Ashley. Hi, Ashley. If you were a celebrity and you were to write a memoir about last week, what would the title be? What would it be about?
It would be called Life is a Many Tangled Web.
Oh, is this because a spider took over your backyard and you had to like hand over the lease to the spider because now you have a double landlord? It's the human landlord and the spider landlord.
Yes. And then to further tangle that web, I hired someone, and by hired, I mean texted my friend.
Who's a boy.
To
the patriarchy prevails.
To murder my landlord, the spider.
Viva la revolution! In honor of the Olympics being in Paris.
Landlord, spider is no more. You know, I was torn about it because at first I opened the door, I saw this spider, and I thought, just let it pass. I'm not going to acknowledge it. I don't want to scare my daughter.
That's Bug.
Yeah.
And did Bug ever notice the spider?
No, because I did a really good job of keeping her protected. And her life is nothing but bliss, thanks to me and all my hard work.
Do you think maybe she should overcome something just to build character? Do you ever fear that Bug has no character? I know she is a character, but does she have character?
Yes, Claire. She works really hard.
Doing what?
Okay, sometimes it rains and she says, oh yeah, I was fine. I survived it.
Okay, so continue. You killed your landlord, spider. Landlord, Polish guy.
Yeah.
He's still fine.
Landlord, Polish guy, A-okay. Landlord, spider has seen better days. I was torn at first because I thought maybe I'll just let him have my house. Maybe we could both live here.
What if you had invited him inside? That's rule number 1. Do not invite a spider inside your house. That's how Dracula gets to eat you.
Really?
Yeah, they're quite polite. They live by the etiquette.
Oh, you think he was a vampire?
No, but I just wouldn't take any risks actively inviting a spider into my home.
I thought they're bats.
Okay.
Are vampires.
Now that you're saying it, I kept saying, in my brain, I kept going, something's wrong, but I plowed forth. I kept going, of course, because Dracula is a man, and you're right. Okay, either way, you know what? I stand by what I said. Dracula or no, don't invite a spider in your home.
I think they know spiders. I think Dracula knows them.
Okay, sorry, continue. I've really gone off the rails here.
So anyway, at first I wasn't going to kill him. I was going to let him live. And then I was going to try to relocate him using science. And then I found out from Google that he's an extremely invasive species. And I thought to myself, you know what? No, you can't invade here. You got to go. And so Kevin killed him.
With a gun or what?
With shoes. He kept telling me to use my shoes. And I was like, well, I like my shoes.
So you made a man come over and for free use his own shoe?
Uh-huh.
A wily woman.
And so now he's gone and all that's left of him is his memory. And that's why I wanted to dedicate this week to his story. Claire, what was your week like chapter-wise?
I think I'm going to call it Lock It Up, Parker.
Okay.
Because
A lot of last names being thrown around this week.
yeah, I can adapt. I heard a theme and I said, we'll run with it. I have been talking out loud to myself a lot recently. And No, okay. So I have a habit of having like very animated conversations in my head where I'm like mouthing the words and acting them out, but I'm quiet about it, if you can believe it.
Okay.
I have been talking out loud to myself.
And you're scared you're going to reveal some family secrets.
I just think it's coming off kooky. The problem is when I bike, I believe I'm in a cocoon of silence and I'm like, well, I'm in my own world. I'm faster than the pedestrian, but I'm a window away from the car. And I just talk. And now I'm in bodegas and I'm walking down the street and I'm just like, oh, there's a dog. And like, I just feel like I'm having like cartoonish thoughts out loud. The other day I was like, milk, 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 milk. As I was going to buy new milk in the bodega. And I'd catch myself and I'd say, Claire, you can't act like that yet. It's not really appropriate at your age.
Yeah, I feel like you've got 20, 30 years before you're allowed to just be singing about milk in the grocery aisle.
I really keep hearing myself. I'm like, who is that?
You can borrow Bug if you need to. I talk to her a lot when I walk, and I don't know that it's normal.
We've really lost it this week. You guys, we are going to Australia, in case you forgot, in case you haven't heard, in case you're like brand new to us, but already in love. This is the first ever episode you've ever heard and you thought, wow, if only I could see these girls live in Australia. Well, you can. We are going to Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Perth, mid to late September. Look it up.
Yeah, September 20th through 29th. I am excited beyond words. The flights are booked. The vibes are immaculate. We are, by the time you hear this, probably packing our capsule wardrobes in a small bag.
Also, if you thought this nonsense conversation was one of the better parts of your day, we do about 2 hours of nonsense a week, plus an extra bonus advice column called Worm to the Wise every month where we answer listener questions. So get your questions answered, listen to other people's problems to feel better about your own.
And that's all on the Patreon.
Link in bio, link in Instagram, link in TikTok, link in if you Google Celebrity Memoir Book Club Patreon.
Or you go to patreon.com/Celebrity Memoir Book Club.
It's everywhere you would think to look.
And we hope that you go looking there. And now, shall we start looking inside or even out? Demi Moore takes us inside out.
So if you guys are saying Demi Moore, I'm an avid Celebrity Memoir Book Club listener and I started at the beginning and now I've caught up. Didn't we already do her? You'd be right. And I have to say, the problem with this podcast is we got better over time, but we started with some of the bests. And I do think a couple of them have deserved a second look. So I think we did a second look at Mariah Carey. We did a second look at Jessica Simpson. And now we've arrived at our third second look, Demi Moore.
Is it Demi or Demi? We have to pick one up top. And if it's wrong, I don't want to hear it from anybody. But I do feel like I need a place to land.
Well, let's work backwards. What do we think Demi Lovato is for sure Demi?
Yes.
And then Demi from The Bachelorette.
That's Demi.
So could Demi be the first of many, or is Demi in a league of her own?
The problem is, in that context, a league of her own.
Okay, so I think we're going to go Demi.
Okay.
Like D''me. Like a Demi.
That's a spicy memoir.
It's quite Italian when you think about it. Okay. So Demi amore. Give me that love. I think that translates to in Italian.
That's so true. Okay, so the thing is...
boy, does she want love.
Boy, does she. And can I say, someone should give it to her.
So buckle up, listen more, and buckle up again, because this is a toughie and she deserved a second look. I don't know how nice we were to her the first one. I can't imagine we were too mean, but
I don't know. We were kind of bitches. I also think we didn't quite give credit.
This is actually a really good celebrity memoir in the context of like, what do you want from a celebrity memoir?
Yeah, I don't think we give credit to how much work she did on herself, because I don't think we realized how little work other people would do on themselves.
I also do think she gives us a good overview of personal plight, behind the scenes. Like she gives like equal parts gossip and trauma, which is rare.
Yeah, and also without being too exploitative of other people's stories. But she does say like, yeah, this is someone that I was with, and you know, here's what it did in my life. Okay, so this book starts with a classic, how did I wind up here? And where did she wind up? Having a seizure on the floor at a party, abusing drugs, and afraid that if she goes to the hospital, people will be like, oh my God, Demi Moore at the hospital. And now we back it up.
Part 1, survival. So she's little, she moved around a lot, but one of her earliest memories is when she's 5 years old. She's in the hospital for months at a time because of a threatening kidney condition called kidney nephrosis. At the time, very little was known, so they had to keep her in the hospital for months while they got her on steroids and figured things out.
So she's 5 years old. Her mom is 23. Her mom had gotten pregnant just out of high school in Roswell, New Mexico, with a man named Danny, who was 1 year older than her. She and Danny had dated, then broken up, and then her mom had married a guy named Charlie. Then Danny found out that she was with Charlie, came running back to New Mexico. She divorces Charlie and marries Danny.
She divorced Charlie, and my parents got married in February 1962. I was born 9 months later, or so I thought.
Bum, bum, bum.
Both my parents had what you might call a relaxed relationship with the truth, but I think Dad actually got joy out of feeling like he'd get one over on someone. So they grew up, not a ton of money to their names, both young parents. I want to say doing their best to get by, but I think what she's trying to imply is they often weren't doing their best to get by. They were often stealing, cheating. They were constantly changing their names to escape credit card debt. They were moving all the time. It was a really chaotic, hectic childhood. And they were not just two people who were like, we're going to work as hard as we can and offer a stable life to our child. They were both people who were like, I think we can scam our way to the top. We want glitz, we want glamour. Her mom grew up poor and she had decided, I'm never going to make my children feel like they don't have something. Her mother didn't allow any generic labels in the home. They both were living constantly beyond their means and then having to scramble to pay their debts back.
Yeah, she says that she feels that if her parents had applied themselves to anything legitimate, they could have been very successful, but instead they just spent years running around working on new schemes. She says they attended 2 new schools a year, her and her brother, throughout their childhoods. They just moved constantly.
Her brother was 4 years younger than her, named Morgan. I had a clear sense from early on that I had to look out for him, for both of us really, because ours were not exactly helicopter parents. Most of the time, the women in her family, her mother, her grandmother, were chasing around these men who were constantly cheating. It did not seem to occur to the women in my family that if you took your cheating husband along when you left, the problem came with you wherever you went. There was that habit of running around America, finding a state where your husband couldn't find a mistress. And unfortunately, there is no such state. I was hospitalized for my kidneys a second time when I was 11, and coincidentally or not, it was right after one of my father's affairs.
So she realizes early on that her body kind of goes into crisis mode when her family is in crisis mode. And then later in life, it continues happening as she never really recovers from any of this. She never addresses any of her trauma, and her body keeps on kind of collapsing in on itself as more and more problems arise in her personal life.
At one point, her family moves to Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. This is obviously a huge deal because that's so far from New Mexico. Normally, they had kept it kind of West Coast based. When they get there, things were no better than they had been. She felt like she stuck out. She says that a lot of what made her a good actress is that she changed schools so often. She was constantly evaluating how to fit in and adapting and changing herself. And this is part of why she's never had a true sense of self. She never got to become who she is. She never even really got to make friends.
So then there is an incident where first her dad is cleaning a gun, shoots a hole through the wall. It grazes his forehead. It's bloody. It's messy. My mother laughed it off, though on the inside, I'm sure she was terrified. And then later that spring, she wakes up to the sound of commotion. She goes into her parents' room and her dad is pinning her mom to the bed, trying to pull pills out of her mouth. She has overdosed on purpose. And so Demi and her dad work together to scoop the pills out of her suicidal mom's mouth.
Something very deep inside me shifted then, and it never shifted back. My childhood was over. Any sense I had that I could count on either of my parents evaporated.
I moved from being someone who they at least tried to take care of to someone they expected to assist them in cleaning up their messes.
So they're in this Pennsylvania suburb. Her mom takes up the new trend in feminism, which is to go to a therapist. And within 6 months, she ends up leaving the family for this therapist, which is pretty fucked up. First, he gets her on medication. He prescribes her a bunch of pills, which she is taking at will and frequently. And then she tells the family, we're leaving. We're moving into this giant house with this therapist, which is so fucked up and abusive.
Yeah.
You cannot, as a therapist, date your patient.
No. And Demi has an aside about this where it just is so sad. She's like, my mom actually sought out help for once, and then she ended up in the clutches of someone who was just going to take advantage of her in a different way. So the mom takes Demi and Morgan with her to go live with Charlie, the therapist, in California. But then the dad is like watching them and kidnaps them.
He takes them and he just drives them up to like Minnesota or something.
Ohio.
And of course, this is before social media, before cell phones. The kids don't 100% understand that they've been kidnapped. They don't even take into consideration that their mom hasn't called to check on them. But it's because she doesn't know where they are. So they spend 3 months completely separated from their mother. And when he brings them back, he uses them as bargaining chips and the family gets back together and this time moves to California.
Ginny wanted me to take, so Ginny is her mom. She refers to her mom as her mom's first name throughout this book. Ginny wanted me to take her side and tell everyone how horrible my dad had been to her, but I couldn't. Aside from the gambling, I felt that they were equally to blame for the chaos in our lives. Now that I was old enough, I could see how childish she was compared to her sisters. So one of her things throughout this book is like, of course, her dad was a mess, but her mom was a huge mess. Like, she talks a lot about kind of growing up and trying to find forgiveness for her mom, but
she's one of the only people where I'm like, you've done too much. Don't forgive your mother.
Yeah,
your mother can like go to hell.
I think what you need to do is figure out how these behaviors have genuinely affected you, because for a lot of this book, I feel like she couldn't quite admit how horrific her mom had been. So then she couldn't even forgive herself for the ways that it affected. Like, you don't need to forgive your mom. Your mom's acting insane.
Aside from like these knockout brawls that her parents would have, they were both gamblers. Her dad often owed money to the mob. Sometimes he would just show up beat up. They were constantly, as I said, moving around, changing their names, avoiding creditors. They both had huge drinking problems. It was just a very dangerous, chaotic time.
I mean, also her parents were like opening up credit and accounts and things in her and her brother's names. If she hadn't just like randomly wound up so rich by the time she was 25, this would have ruined the rest of her life too. So then they moved to Southern California as a complete unit again. And the mom gets a job as a secretary for this guy who's paying her way too well. And so, you know, they're like, something odd is going on here, but we're not going to even look into it.
Deanna, her mother's sister, her Aunt Deanna, remembers that whenever my mother was alone with Frank in his office, the door was always locked. But they're living kind of a good life. Her mom gets nice gifts. Her mom gets a new car. He's paying for their apartment for some reason. Nobody can figure out why. She's also 13 at this point, and she says it marked the beginning of a new stage in our relationship. I was only 13, but when I asked Ginny if I could go with friends to a club in the valley, she said, sure, take the car. If you get stopped by the police, just say you're driving it without your parents' permission.
Then this guy who's employing her mom gets arrested. So the feds come after Ginny and Danny, and they turn in Frank, the mom's boss, because they're like, oh, we've been doing tons of crime.
Well, not them. Danny.
Danny's been doing tons of crime.
Danny has the IRS come after him and he gives information on basically his wife's boyfriend as a way of revenge. And of course, this is the last straw for Ginny. Ginny's like, I really would be better off without you.
Because now they have no money. And she's like, well, if I have no money.
They had been living pretty good for a while. For like 6 months, they had a pretty good gig with her, dating her boss, buying her nice stuff, keeping him in a good apartment.
So then they split up. And Ginny takes Demi and Danny takes Morgan. And Demi is like, why didn't my dad even consider wanting me? Like, why was there no fight put up whatsoever? Then it was just the two of them living in the valley. Ginny's always got a boyfriend. She's always got a guy on the hook. And Demi is now being treated like her best friend / little sister. She would kind of take her out and use her as bait to like lure in men at bars and clubs.
Yeah, Demi at this point is 14. And, you know, growing into herself, and she's taking her out late. Men are approaching them. She really gets off on being like, she's not my sister, she's my daughter. She specifically moves them into this apartment complex for singles and divorcees. Interestingly enough, she meets and becomes friends with Nastasia Kinski there, which is what inspires her to become an actress. She's never seen someone so beautiful and self-possessed, and she thinks she's so smart and so interesting. And she feels a kinship with her because she says Nastasia is also supporting her mother. And so she knows what it's like to be the child adult situation. And she goes, whatever Nastasia has, I'm going to make it happen for me too. She goes, I didn't want to be an actress. I wanted to like have what she had. I wanted to make it happen the way she had made it happen.
Nastasia takes her to dinner a couple times with Roman Polanski. And then a few days later, he flees the United States and then makes that movie Tess that Nastasia stars in and wins a Golden Globe.
Around this time, she's looking for her birth certificate, and she notes that her parents' marriage certificate is dated November 11th, 1963, as opposed to 1962. This is interesting because she herself is
born in 1962.
Yeah.
She thought she was born 9 months after her parents got married.
But she was actually born 4 months
before they got married.
So she's doing the math backwards and going, wait a minute, would that mean that you had time to divorce that guy, Charlie? And she realizes through addition and subtraction that guy, Charlie, might actually be her biological dad. And when she confronts her mom about it, she goes, well, who told you that? And so immediately she's like, oh my God, it's true. And it turns out everybody had known, all of her cousins, all of her aunts and uncles. She was the last to know. She feels like a fucking idiot. She feels like she can't trust anybody. Why wasn't I ever told? Because your dad never wanted you to know. So they go over to visit the dad in Morgan. Her mom walks in and immediately goes, Demi knows. In no time, she had a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and she seemed high on the drama of the situation, the power it had given her to hurt him. Nobody asked me if I was okay or if I had questions. Neither of my parents seemed to care about what this revelation meant to me. And of course, she says, my dad's excuse was that he didn't want me to love him any different. But the truth is, once I found out, he started changing around me. He pulled away immediately. And now she feels like not only has she been lied to by her mother, but abandoned by her father. So she's down to truly no parents.
So she goes to meet Charlie, who is also just a piece of shit. He picks her up. He's excited to meet her. The whole family's excited to meet her, his side of the family in Texas. Apparently, Demi's grandparents had been sending them a couple photos over the years because everyone knew Charlie was the actual dad. And he felt that he'd been kind of like robbed of a relationship with her. They all felt that way. He picks her up from the airport with his mistress, takes her around town, drops off the mistress, brings her home to the wife. The wife is like, nervous that her husband has this other kid. And she's like, as she should be, he's fully cheating on her. He's a bad husband. And she just doesn't really connect with Charlie.
She goes, he may be my biological father, but Danny's my dad. She does say it's quite unnerving, though. She meets another one of his children from another relationship besides his wife. And she says, he looked exactly like me, like the boy version of me. And it's true. She looks a lot like her biological father. When you see the photo of him, you go, oh, that makes sense.
So she starts going to Fairfax High School. It's like not that big of a deal. She doesn't really go that often. Her and her mom go out together all the time.
Her mom is now sporadically attempting suicide. I found her sprawled across the bed, surrounded by empty pill bottles. I remember calling the hospital for an ambulance in a kind of frozen trance, a disassociated state that would become increasingly familiar to me as the years passed, in which I would leave my body and just cope with being really present.
I had to figure out a way to support myself so I could start leading my own life and escape from the crazy unpredictability of my mother's.
I was the girl whose mother was always trying to kill herself. I was the girl who'd been abandoned by 2 fathers. My wandering eye, she had a lazy eye, was suddenly seemed like an obvious physical manifestation of a truth about me. I was just off, and everyone could tell. I had surgery just before I turned 15 that finally fixed my eye, but in my own mind, I remained marked as broken.
So in this apartment complex where they live in, she is very unsupervised. She's spending a lot of time with older guys. And there is one day where she's just drinking with these older guys, and they take advantage of her. And for years, she does not consider what happened assault because she thinks that she deserved it just because she was a woman.
I blame myself for acting provocative and older than my years. Afterward, I was left with the hollow, empty feeling of being used, a new kind of lonely.
When you are sexually assaulted in a culture that tells you over and over again that admitting your victimization makes you a suspect, makes you a liar, makes you a slut who deserves to have your life put under a microscope, guess what? You keep it a secret. So there are a lot of bad things that have happened to her that she's just never told anyone, but like it took her decades to consider that what happened was wrong because she was raised in this culture of women not being worth anything.
Yeah, and also she had nobody to turn to, nowhere was safe. She was constantly in like defense survival mode, and there's no real time to sit and look at yourself and like contemplate what's happening to you when you're just trying to get to the next day, when there's nobody that you can turn to. She starts acting. She gets a pretty girl type agent. She says she gets a gig here and there. She plays a 13-year-old prostitute in a TV show called Kaz. Little things, but she's working and she's trying for herself. One day she's hanging out with her mom at lunch, and a man comes over and introduces himself as Val Dumas. He's in his early 50s. He starts chatting with them and saying, oh, come back to my restaurant. It's called Le Dome. And he starts taking her out to lunch, showing up at her school, driving her home. It's easier to go in the car with him than take the bus, so she goes for it. But she definitely starts feeling freaked out. She's like, why does this old man want to have lunch with me? She's weirded out by it, but she kind of quiets her discontent by being like, well, he's a family friend. This is what family friends do. Then one day I got home from school and he was there inside the apartment waiting for me. I felt the blood drain from my body. What are you doing here? I asked him. Where's my mom?
So he rapes her and then says to her, how does it feel to be whored out by your mother for $500?
Yeah, the next day after he rapes her, he's there to help him and her mom move into some new fancy apartment building, which is where he turns to her and says it not once, but twice.
She spent years repressing what happened.
Repressing it. And to this day, she has a hard time even believing that's what could have literally happened. She can't really wrap her mind around the idea that her mom would have this explicit negotiation with this man. And I think she's tried to make herself feel better by saying, well, maybe it was like he helped her out and then nothing was said out loud. But she goes, at the end of the day, my mom gave this man a key to our apartment and told him when I would be home alone. And then the next day we moved in somewhere nice. And how do you do that? It's really one of the worst things I think we've ever read. 200 books later, this is one of the most harrowing, horrific, cruel, fucked up things I think that can happen to a young girl, done by her mother, and then to be forced by him to reckon with the fact that it was done purposefully. Is like truly, I don't know how you ever come back from that in your life. I don't know how you ever regain normalcy or trust or have a healthy relationship when something is so awful.
Sole person who exists on this earth to protect you did the most horrific thing anyone could do to you. So then she starts going to acting class and she meets this guy named Tom Dunstan. He is 28 and she's 16. She goes, we had a surprisingly healthy dynamic. There are a couple people in their lives, including Tom's mom, who are like, why are you dating a teenager?
Okay, can I say, it sounds like she was less worried about her adult, nearly 30-year-old son dating someone half his age and more like concerned that this teenager was going to glom onto her adult son.
Yeah.
I don't think she was worried about the age gap because like Demi had to be protected. I think she was kind of like, this is just a gold digger.
Probably. But he, essentially the main thing that he provided for her is to make her feel like she was worth more than just someone to have sex with.
I mean, at least he gave her a home that was safe and consistent.
He took her to school. She was doing continuation school at that point. He made her feel like she mattered. And she still felt drawn to her parents. So she goes to New Mexico to see her family. And then they keep her there. She wants to go back to her apartment with Tom. And they will not let her. She tries to go back to LA and they have her arrested at the airport because they say she's a runaway teen.
They really exist to just kind of fuck her over. Anytime she shows any boundary creating, anytime she gets away from the chaos they've created, they take it as like a direct slap in the face and do everything they can to draw her back. And I mean, Tom said, don't go. They're going to fuck you over. And sure enough, they steal her plane ticket, call the police. And she says at the end of this police interaction, she's sitting there crying and she could tell the police is like, they're obviously drunk and on drugs, but unfortunately you are under 18. There's nothing I can do. She runs away to her grandmother's at one point and says, they don't care about me, I said. And at that moment, I knew I was telling the truth. 40 years later, I no longer think of it in those terms. They loved me, but they loved me the way they loved each other, the only way they knew how, inconsistently and conditionally. From them, I learned that love was something you had to scramble to keep. It could be revoked at any minute for reasons that you couldn't understand, that you couldn't control. The kind of love I grew up with was scary to need and painful to feel. If I didn't have that uneasy ache, that prickly anxiety around someone, how would I know it was love? I mean, you have to do what you have to do to survive, but to look at the way her mother treated her, what her mother did to her, and to try to find any semblance of love in that, I don't know.
She has so much compassion for the fact that her dad was so messed up to her mom, that her mom was so young when she had her. She was so young when she had her, but she wasn't so young when she was being so cruel decades later.
Yeah, I don't know. At 20 years old, not to sell your teenage daughter to an adult man.
Yeah.
That's like something you kind of always know.
Okay, so then Tom takes her to see a band called The Cats, and they have a man in their band named Freddie Moore. Does that last name sound familiar to you?
He changed my life, or at least my name. Her name up to this point is Demi Guynes, I think.
Yeah.
Guynes. Freddie wrote most of the band's songs and played guitar. He was cute. He had blue eyes.
He was 29 and he was married to his high school sweetheart from Minnesota, and she was still 16 at this point. And she's like, I was a self-absorbed teenager. I didn't think of the fact that he had a wife and I should. And it's like, no, he was a 29-year-old man. It is not the 16-year-old's job to be like, but don't you have a wife at home? It's the man's job to be like, you're a minor.
Between sets, I maneuvered Freddie into the bathroom. Within a month, I'd left Tom to move in with him. So he's very serious off stage. He's very disciplined, very into writing his music. She quits school. She's following his band around. They have a shitty little truck that they drive around and keep all their stuff in the back. His manager takes Freddie aside and goes, watch out. I think that girl's only after your money. And Demi's like, what fucking money? Do you know how much money some shitty little band that's touring in the back of their car makes? Negative. It's so funny.
Everyone thinks she's a gold digger. And I'm like, she is a terrible gold digger. She keeps on dating pores.
For you to be a gold digger, someone has to have gold.
Support for Celebrity Memoir Book Club comes from Macy's. If you are updating your fall wardrobe or just looking for new pieces to add to your fall collection, check out Macy's Backstage. We had the shock of our lives recently when Claire found out that she was actually a silver girl.
I got my colors done last spring. It changed my life, but also brought a lot of things into clarity. But now I have to slowly and affordably update my entire wardrobe, which is no small feat. Every single accessory had to be updated.
We thought for, I don't know, how old are you? 31. We thought for 31 years that Claire was an autumn and a gold girl. And it turns out she is a bright winter and a silver girl. I feel like it's something I've been slowly discovering about myself for a long time until I changed my hair color and everything adjusted, but we can't abide by that. It's all fake. Yours is true to your tone and something that needs to be addressed head on.
And I have gone to Macy's Backstage to slowly update my belts, my jewelry, my earrings, anything close to my face especially. I've been trying to slowly update, and I am so grateful to find things that are affordable. They have such a great collection. I go to my local Macy's. I love going in person. I'm not a big online shopper, but I love trying on all the options, bopping around. It's my favorite. It's like my new weekend activity.
Whether you are back to school shopping or just looking to upgrade your fall wardrobe, head to Macy's Backstage to find items for under $15. Find a Backstage near you at macys.com/backstage. So she finds out from a friend that there is like a quick way to make money. You sell nudes to Japanese magazines. Basically, it won't come back to the US.
That's what her friend says anyway.
Sure.
She's like, nobody will ever see it because like, why would anyone from Japan come here?
And then another magazine sees her nudes and is like, oh, would you want to do this French magazine called Oui? And she's like, sure. And she gets paired with Philip Dixon, who is a well-known fashion photographer. And then he likes her so much, he brings her for another project. And then she gets signed to Elite Models.
I was thrilled, even though at first I didn't get any major assignments, just little local jobs like newspaper ads for department stores and the poster for the cult horror movie I Spit on Your Grave. I earned just enough to squeak by. And she says it's funny that modeling was the first time in her life she made money, and that gave her a sense of pride and self-esteem. And it was very empowering that she was able to go and have this career. But at the same time, modeling is by definition focused on your looks and telling you that your value is your looks, which serves a pretty toxic route for our friend Demi.
So her dad and Morgan are living together. Morgan is 12 and her dad is in really bad shape. He's been having major health problems. He was told that he needed to stop drinking and stop eating red meat. And so he started drinking heavily and eating more meat.
Everything he was told not to do, he did in spades. He was slowly trying to kill himself. He told me many times that he wanted to die.
And then later that year, he committed suicide in the garage.
It was technically called an accidental death because he was so drunk, but she believes that he was able to do that on purpose so that they could collect the insurance money, because you do not get insurance money from a suicide. But he was like just drunk enough in his blood alcohol that nothing he did could be determined purposeful.
And so she believes it was one final scam from old Danny so that Morgan could have a little bit of money.
She says the funeral was a nightmare. Her father's family and her mother's family were at odds the whole time. They said the mother shouldn't even get to go because she drove him insane. Some of them even believed she was behind it, that she had murdered him and made it look like an accident. She, of course, is like besides herself, saying he was the love of her life. They were together for decades.
Her 29-year-old boyfriend told her, there's no point in crying. There's nothing you can do.
My dad died in October. I turned 18 in November, and I got married to Freddie the following February. It was obviously a confusing and fraught time, and our wedding reflected the scattershot nature of the decision. I wore a vintage dress with flowers tucked behind my veil. It was at some little Spanish church in LA. I can't remember where.
It's just so sad the way she's so pretty. And then she picks these insecure losers. And then they like are so mean to her because what they like about her is that she's pretty and chasing them because she like needs someone to love her. Then her career just kind of launches into the ether. It's not quite overnight, but it's pretty quick.
John Casablancas, the legendary owner of Elite, picked me with a handful of other girls to go to New York City. She goes on all these go-sees. It's so interesting. I feel like I would never have thought of her as like a fashion model. I guess she isn't, but they're trying. Her husband, Freddie, comes with her. Right away, Freddie and I were going in different directions, and I began to pull away from him. She gets cast in a commercial.
And then she gets cast on General Hospital.
And she's like, I know it was a big deal. And she went in, she hoped to nail it, and she does. And she gets this like huge role. Jackie Templeton turned out to be a really big role. And in general, soaps are just hard work, different from other television and definitely different from film. There's no other medium where an actor is given 30 pages to memorize and film in a day.
She notices pretty quickly that she has a huge alcohol problem. She doesn't know how to stop. If she has a drink, she'll just keep drinking. She gets so drunk at this General Hospital panel that she's flown out to do that she's like, oh, I cannot fuck up my career like this. And so she just quits drinking cold turkey.
Break number 3 came just after I turned 20 in 1982 when I auditioned for a part in my first real movie. It's Blame It on Rio, and she gets the gig. She gets to go live in Rio for a couple months. She ends up making a lot of friends. Her and Freddie kind of split up. And here she's not drinking, but she's doing tons of cocaine. And she's like, well, how could cocaine be bad for you if it makes me feel so awake and energetic and creative?
Yeah. She makes this friend who's still, she says, one of her good friends to this day in Brazil. And they're just doing so much cocaine. She figures out a way to pocket more of her per diem from the movie. They're putting her up in a hotel, but she finds out if she gets an apartment, then she gets way more money that she can just spend on heaps of cocaine.
Even as I was acting out in Brazil, I was having a kind of epiphany about honesty. The person I wanted to be didn't lie. When I got back from Rio, I was determined to be completely truthful with Freddie, to take responsibility for what I'd done and what I wanted. She admits that she had hooked up with this guy that worked on the film. Obviously, they break up. And sure enough, he immediately starts dating this 14-year-old that he was giving guitar lessons to, and they're still married to this day. And she says the thing about her dating all these men that are 10, 15 years older than her when she's a minor is that looking around at the culture, most people were. She really doesn't think twice about it. She says it was so common, and it was so common back then, and it's really fucking gross because 14-year-old back then were not any more mature than they are now.
Probably less.
Because they didn't know about
TikTok.
Drunk elephant.
They didn't even have bronzing drops. She's like, he was giving guitar lessons to this 14-year-old, and I really saw a spark between them. Ugh.
So she is now 21 years old, living alone, divorced, and because she had been taking all these movies, they had kind of written her out of General Hospital. So she starts drinking again. It was a really dark time for me.
She buys this motorcycle, and she's just ripping around Hollywood, drunk on a motorcycle.
She gets the lead part in a movie called No Small Affair. John Cryer kind of falls in love with her. She's like, listen, kid, I'm no good for you. But she becomes very self-destructive. And people luckily start looking out for her. There's this man, Craig Baumgarten, a studio executive at Columbia, takes her under his wing and is keeping an eye out for her. And sure enough, she gets a life-changing role of
this part of Jules in a movie called St. Elmo's Fire. This guy, Joel Shoemaker, sees her running down a hallway and sends his assistant to grab her. So she's cast in the movie. It's a huge moment. Everyone is watching this brat pack as they emerge. But right away, they're like, okay, this girl has a huge drinking problem. She parties way too much. And so the production team is like, you have to go to rehab before we can start the movie.
They essentially stage an intervention and have it so that when she goes to the rehab the next day to see what the deal is, they have everything there for her. And they make a deal with her and they say, the only way you can be in this film is if you do 15 days of rehab, complete everything they tell you to complete, and have a sober coach on set with you 24/7. And it, for the meantime, saves her fucking life.
Yeah, she says that if I had to give up alcohol on my own, I wouldn't have done it. But I wanted this movie so bad that she was able to really turn her life around for a while. For me personally, St. Elmo's will always be the movie that changed my life. If I hadn't gone to rehab to make that film, I really wonder if I'd still be alive. In order to stay sober, you have to do it for you. But you know how people are always like, you can't ever get sober for anything else? You kind of can until it clicks.
Yeah. She's somebody who can't stop. And so she learns okay, if once I start, I can't stop. I just shouldn't start. And she's able to be sober for 20 years. I mean, she really does not drink again for quite a long time until a certain somebody comes into her life.
I feel like the problem is that in order to get sober, you have to have something about yourself that you that you want to save. And at this point, she didn't, other than this movie.
Yeah. Something funny, I will say, she's actually quite accountable and honest and vulnerable in this book, but every now and then, as everybody does, she has a funny little line. She's talking about how much she hated being called the Brat Pack, which was this group of kids that came up out of the St. Elmo's Fire, Molly Ringwald, Matt Dillon, Sean Penn, his brother Chris. She hated that term because it implied we were all a bunch of spoiled, partying, entitled juvenile delinquents. I'd never been anything even close to spoiled, and I certainly wasn't partying. Okay, I mean, not today, but 15 days ago, you were on weeks-long cocaine benders. It's so funny when people get righteous about semantics to be okay, sure, I was doing nothing but cocaine for 6 straight months in Rio, but that was last week.
So she starts dating Emilio Estevez, and he's from a big acting family. You might have heard of Charlie Sheen, Martin Sheen. And she's like obsessed with the way they're just like a close-knit family of artistes. They view acting as an art, not a job. She's very inspired by them. I feel like so many people treat her as like a beautiful prop.
She talks about just sitting and listening and being in awe of everything they talked about in dinner. And I think young men really love, that thing where like a man will talk the entire date and they'll be like, this was such a good conversation. And you're like, yeah, because you love to hear yourself talk. I think she is somebody who's so excited about you that you just can project onto her any way you want to see yourself.
Yeah.
They're engaged within 6 months. She is so insecure the whole time, especially because of his family, especially because she feels not only does she not come from a close-knit family, but his family is not just tight and loving, but educated and smart and thoughtful, and they're advocates. Of course, I mean, Charlie Sheen's like fucking horrific, but that doesn't really matter to her. All she can see is her own vulnerabilities and her own weaknesses.
Also, at the time, that wasn't like known.
Yeah. I've seen his mother since and talked to her, and she had a totally different perspective of me than I would have thought, which I think is sweet. I think it's nice to find out that the people you thought looked down on you never really did, and that was just in your head.
So then, as she's recovering from drinking and drug use and a lot of insecurities and an entire childhood of trauma, she quits cigarettes, gains a little bit of weight because she's no longer smoking cigarettes, and then she gets cast in this movie where they say, we want you to be in this movie, but not unless you lose weight. And this sends her on another 20-year spiral of massive eating disorders.
And so began my process of trying to dominate and control my body and of equating my worth to my weight, my size, and my exterior. I feel like she's too nice to the people that have done her dirty. She's like, it could have been different if I was different. I could have just said, you're right, I've gained a few pounds and I'll get back fit. And I'm like, I don't know. It's really hard, I think, when an executive board of professionals, we polled the investors and we've decided for a business plan, you need to lose weight. It's hard to take that in stride.
It's hard to take that in stride, especially after you're coming off of rehab for drug and alcohol use. And also your dad just died. And also you just divorced a pedophile. And also you're about to marry this guy who's like actually pretty condescending and bitchy. And also a childhood of nonstop trauma.
And now you're a celebrity best known for showing her body. She's constantly in these films that are more or less about her body.
Yeah, I feel like for someone to sit a woman down and say, this will only be good if you lose weight, like there's no way to belittle how much that fucks you up. Especially when she spends the entire time thinking, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And they're like, you're right.
Yeah.
Only because of the way you are.
So she's in One Crazy Summer and About Last Night. About Last Night is a huge hit, but it's like a sex film. So she's having sex in it a lot. Next, she does an off-Broadway play called The Early Girl, where she's naked live every night. Clearly something in me was attracting these kinds of roles. I could have easily said no, but on a deeper level, I knew that I needed to be pushed out of my comfort zone. If I was ever going to overcome my body issues, I had to confront them head on. I don't actually think that's true. I think that's like a misdiagnosis of what's going on. I feel that she has such insecurity. She really does not believe that she is a good actress who deserves great roles. And I think part of her thinks, well, if I can be naked in it, I know that that's something I can offer. You know what I mean? I don't think she goes, wow, if I'm naked every night, I'll learn to be comfortable in my own skin in a way that helps heal my eating disorder. Because let me tell you, we've barely scratched the surface of how bad it gets for her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? All of these roles that focus on her body do not help her feel comfortable in her body. They only give her sort of a professional explanation for why she can publicly be constantly
like scrutinizing her body.
Yeah.
So Emilio is a liar. He lies to her a couple of times. He's cheating on her. And she finally goes to see a therapist at one point. She's about to get married in 6 months. And the therapist goes, I don't have time for you to figure this out. If you marry him, it will ruin your life.
And then I guess she's like, bring Emilio in here. He goes in and they should up say, well, what are your priorities? And Demi is like the 7th priority. And they go, you can't marry someone if you're like not a top priority. So they don't get married. He tries to win her back, but it was too late. Once I'm done, I'm done. But they remain friends, and she heads to this movie premiere where she meets none other than Bruce Willis. And this is where I would like to bring up our favorite disease, Jada Pinkett Smith disease, which is when you run so fast through your life that you never have time to sit and like process and heal.
Yeah.
If you go from horrific childhood to horrific boyfriend to becoming a star in movies to getting engaged to immediately meeting your next husband, like sometimes you need to be single for 6 months.
Yeah. I think it's so good for people sometimes to be single for 6 months or 4 years. So she meets Bruce Willis at this party. He's like obsessed with her. He sees her. He's starring in this TV show that has really put him on the map, but she's never seen it. And he's like following her around. She finds out later that he had been on a date that night. And she's like, oh, random.
I can't believe that because he had been so nice to me. And I'm like, oh, you lose him how you get him.
He calls her the next day and he's like, what are you up to? And she's like, oh, I'm going to see my like weird aunt. And he's like, I'll come.
She goes, I can't believe that he would drive all the way up to Malibu just to meet my family. He must really be something. And she says, from then on, basically from our first meeting on, Bruce and I were rarely apart. He made me feel like a princess. He lived large and soon I did too. Bruce came from nothing and now that he'd made it, he wanted the best of everything and plenty of it.
Okay, so I just ran a quick check. She says that he had been nominated for 2 Emmys at this point and he won his first Emmy 1 month later. I looked it up. He won his Emmy September 1987 for Moonlighting.
They end up getting married that November. So they knew each other for maybe 3 months. 4 if you stretch it.
I got pregnant on my wedding night, November 21st, 1987 at the Golden Nugget, Tom Sandoval's favorite restaurant.
Where Tom Sandoval and Ariana Grande would make out. Famously. We went all in right away, talking about how badly we both wanted to have kids, our own family. We had a shared vision for our future. I think we were both longing to fill the emptiness, that sense that we'd always had something big that was missing. It's so funny. She tries to give him a little backstory to make him more sympathetic. And she's like, he had a hard life, working class parents, a stutter. And I'm like, okay, your mom sold you. Your mom sold you as a sex slave as a child. Like Joe Biden had a stutter and became president. That's fine. That's nothing.
That king had a stutter and they made a movie about it.
Yeah, they made him king. Turns out all the most powerful men in the world have stutters. Joe Biden, the king, Bruce Willis. Name a more powerful man. You can't.
You can't. God, that's the problem is like she spends a couple pages like really hyping up their love. And I can't believe we just looked it up and their whole courtship was like 2 months.
And then she was pregnant. Yeah.
He wrapped my fear and anxiety in love. I mean, it's not that hard to make someone feel comfortable for 37 minutes. Because she's like, well, our relationship was tough because when we both were working later, through the time we were dating, I'd only been promoting a movie. And it's like, yeah, you'd only been promoting a movie because there's not that much that can get done in 2 months. Jesus Christ.
So they get married at Vegas, as we just said. And then Warner Brothers is like, wow, this could be like a huge publicity stunt for us because we're promoting a movie with each of you in it. So they pay for her to have this giant over-the-top wedding that's presided over by Little Richard.
Yeah, and it's like on a soundstage.
Yeah, they have a soundstage that looks like a church and then a soundstage that looks like a reception. Her mom's there and ends up getting arrested. She has this thing where anytime the attention's off of her, she freaks out and causes a scene. Rumor Glenn Willis was born on her due date, August 16th, 1988 in Kentucky because Bruce was shooting in country. She loves being a mother. Being a mother felt totally natural. It's one of the few things I can confidently say I was innately good at.
Even my messed up relationship with my own mother seemed transformed by the birth of my daughter. So her mom comes to spend time with them and like loves being a grandma. Again, I do feel just so sad thinking about that timeline. The way that her and Bruce, like she can put so much into like the idealization. She's so good at idealizing a relationship. And it's so easy to idealize a relationship that you've only been in for 5 minutes.
It's also crazy to think that she had just gotten out of this engagement with Emilio Estevez, and they were supposed to be married in 6 months. A month later, she meets Bruce Willis. 3 months later, she marries Bruce Willis. So in the time between her broken off engagement and broken off wedding, she like meets, engages, and marries another man. That's just like too quick a timeline.
She has too much trauma.
This is what I always want to say to celebrities about getting married. Why not keep dating? Before you get married, why don't you just keep dating? If you love each other so much, just don't break up. You don't have to. Not getting married doesn't mean you're breaking up.
It just means you're not married yet.
And you still could. And you know what? The longer you date, the more you could get married. So she's 25 at this point with a baby, with a husband that's been in Die Hard. They're the it couple. I know this sounds like the perfect life, but as I would soon find out, if you carry a well of shame and unresolved trauma inside of you, no amount of money, no measure of success or celebrity can fill it. Boy, do I know it. So they immediately become obsessed with this town called Haley. Haley is famous for being a town that they like bought and then bankrupted.
In Idaho.
I was thinking about how mad people got at you. Last time we did this book, you did a TikTok about this, and I can't even remember what they were so mad at you, right?
Yeah, I think I said that they like bought and bankrupted Haley, Idaho, and everyone was like, no, they didn't. And I was like, okay, well, the Haley, Idaho bank records say different. I can't wait to relive it. So they buy this property in Haley and they start spending a ton of time there. Ginny is going through it. She overdoses on drugs and ends up in the hospital. She's also drunk driving. So she sends her mom to rehab. And then Ginny starts selling photos of Demi. And this is where things start to fall apart. She sells a photo of Rumor. She starts like just really engaging with the paparazzi and the tabloids in a way that Demi cannot stand. She's like, listen, you can wreak havoc on my life, but you cannot, like, these people are not your friends. You are not the center of attention. They're not coming after you because they love you. They're coming after you to fuck with me.
I wanted to protect my daughters from everything invasive and ugly. It was one of the main reasons we ended up raising our girls in Idaho. The fact that Ginny couldn't realize that what she was doing was a complete betrayal. She knew full well how I felt about those magazines and the lies they had printed about me in the past. I know, the only thing that's surprising about all this is that I was, yet again, surprised. Children are hardwired to trust their parents. It's amazing how long it can take to override the wiring. So then she decides that after her pregnancy, her body would be better than ever. Great. Good. Why not? She, within 3 months, lost all the baby weight plus an extra 8 pounds. And then she hosts SNL where they write this monologue for her where they're like, wouldn't it be so funny if you get up there and just talk about how great you look? And she's like, I guess it could have been funny if I had committed to the bit being like, don't I look great? But I was so nervous that it really didn't come out that funny. It was just me saying I'm beautiful.
So then she gets this offer to do a movie with Robert De Niro in Canada, but Bruce is also about to do a movie. And so he's like, well, yeah, you can't have one then. And she's like, no, I'm an actress.
I'm really proud of her for standing up for herself because I really could see her buckling under the pressure.
Me too. But you can also see exactly right here where this relationship breaks apart forever.
He says, this will never work. What do you mean this won't work? I genuinely didn't understand what he was talking about. This is never going to work if you're off shooting a film. What he meant was that our life wouldn't work if I was engrossed in something outside of our family.
I guess he was right. And that is something they definitely could have figured out if they dated for more than 2 months.
It's important to have conversations with the man you're going to marry. Like, what kind of family do you think we'll have? Am I allowed to have a job?
I felt way too much anxiety to have a real conversation with Bruce about our assumptions regarding work, gender roles, and parenting, the deep stuff we obviously needed to start figuring out together to have a successful marriage. Instead, I jumped right into how can I fix this? So every single weekend she flies home with her baby to see Bruce, and he comes to visit them one time.
Horrible.
I'm so sick of men.
So then she gets Ghost and she goes, okay, this is going to bomb or this is going to be huge.
And it was both.
But it was more huge than not.
The critics hated it, but overall it was a smashing success and people still watch it to this day. I've never seen it.
It was also helpful for her emotionally. She had never really cried before. She had learned to bottle everything in and just keep going. But she had to be able to cry. And so she works with a breathwork coach. And it kind of gives her, for the first time, an insight. She goes, oh my God, even though I'm not crying, there are times when I'm pretty upset, it turns out.
She talks about how she was able to harness those lessons years later to that single tear as Madison Reed in Charlie's Angels 2. Okay, I'm going to watch Ghost and G.I. Jane for the Patreon. And then as a treat, I get to watch Charlie's Angels 2.
Okay.
I'm so excited to watch Charlie's Angels 2. I think that's one of my favorite movies of all time.
So anyway, her professional life is crushing it. She is soaring. About Last Night, Ghost, they're like doing amazing. My personal life was painful. Right before Rumor's second birthday, Bruce was going to do a film in Europe and basically goes, I don't know if I want to be married anymore.
And she goes, wait, what? He's such a Pisces.
She is doing literally anything she can in her life to find love and forgiveness and acceptance for the people that have treated her pretty badly. Because that's like the only way forward. And if what she can say about this man who like love bombed her, got her pregnant, tried to ruin her career and then ditched her is, well, you know, he's a Pisces and he had a stutter. So who could have expected anything more? That one's on me. She goes, part of me wanted to be, well, if you're not in this marriage, then I'm out. But unfortunately, she does this thing where she goes, okay, well, let me know. You need to figure it out. And he kind of just waffles for what seems like the next 10 years.
He was struggling to resolve the conflict with himself. He wanted a family and grounding, but he also craved excitement and novelty. Basically, he wanted to do whatever the fuck he wanted. Not so unusual in men that age. He was 36 at the time. Throw celebrity and money in, you do the math. He was what?
He was old enough to like know what marriage is when he got into it. She goes, I just didn't buy the you're the king kind of thing, which he thrived on. Plus, telling me I don't know if I want to be married is not exactly the way to my heart. However, he comes back from shooting this movie. They have sex. Bang, bing, bong, boom, prego. Prego with a little lady you might have heard of named Scout LaRue.
Oh my God. Do you know what? Scout LaRue, new single out now.
You just looked that up?
Mm-hmm.
When?
Today.
She went to Brown.
Pretty smart. Around this time, she gets the cover of Vanity Fair and she's shooting this movie called The Butcher's Wife where she has to dye her hair blonde. She hates The Butcher's Wife. It was a movie that her agents were like, you should do this because they're going to pay you a lot of money and it'll get your rate up. And ever since then, she's like, the money is not the reason to pick something.
Luckily, she also ends up being the highest paid woman in Hollywood for a bit. So I guess when all of the movies are the most paid movies, then you don't have to do anything for the money. You could do everything for the love of being the most paid actress.
So she has blonde hair. She shoots this Vanity Fair cover, and Vanity Fair is like, we don't want blonde Demi Moore. We wanted the good Demi Moore. So then they had to reshoot it. But at this point, she's like 9 months pregnant. So they shoot this like gorgeous fashion campaign where she's like, I just wanted to look fashionable and beautiful and also pregnant and have pregnancy like be like, you don't have to just like wear a tent dress to be pregnant. This was not the time in our nation's history when women were like looking awesome while pregnant. They were hiding it.
So they end up at the end of this shoot taking a sexy one for Bruce Willis. It's her nudie patootie, breast in hand, cooch under tum.
And it's very lovely.
And they make it the cover, but they know what they're doing. They know they're being scandalous because they put it in like a white jacket slip and they say, more Demi Moore under here. People go bananas. They go berserk in the streets. They're calling it dirty, slutty pornography, which, listen, ain't no one got pregnant without getting a little boned first. The thing about pregnant women is they all fucking.
And so that's what Demi says. She's like, why have we divorced sexuality from pregnancy entirely? How
because it's
are
perverted
people
to have sex near a baby? That's a baby. It can't consent.
This is like one of the crazier things of all time that like this cover was the most scandalized America has ever been.
I mean, I laugh because it's like so hard for me to even like I know and I believe, but the idea that people would be like, burn her down, she's a slut whore witch because she had a bit of a belly, a baby in tow, a bun in the oven.
Isn't that where you like women, Republicans? Preg?
Yeah, but hidden in a factory somewhere.
Preg, but keep it a secret. Anyway, it seems like she kind of like took it in stride. She was like, you guys are bitches. Get your loser heads out of your loser asses.
She says to this day, it's one of the things she's most proud of because it did change the culture. It did push the needle a bit. And it's so true. I mean, I was looking at the Serena Williams cover where she's preggo. Now every fucking sorority bitch has a nudie patootie pregnancy announcement on her Instagram.
Exactly.
And those are like conservative Christian Republicans and they're badged to the calf. They're often sitting, you know, knees buckled.
So the problem is she loves the cover. It's something that she's deeply proud of. The article itself, and this is crazy on Vanity Fair's part, honestly, to put this insane, empowering photo on the front and then write an article about what a bitch she is a wacky move.
Is it?
I think it is.
It's like a double win for the magazine.
I guess.
Sometimes bitchy women can strike an incredible pose. Look at Naomi Campbell.
That's so true.
What are you going to like find an ugly photo to match when she throws cell phones and like works for Epstein? No, like there's no photo where she looks bad.
I guess like to put her looking that empowered on the cover and like have it be a point where like obviously the magazine.
Can I say this word empowered is like not a given?
It's not
Some
a
people
given.
would say it's like a scandalous photo with like a scandalous article.
I guess that's true, but I felt very sad for Demi about this article.
Can I say the way that the editor-in-chief put it in a slip and said more Demi Moore inside as if it were in fact a Playboy magazine?
I guess they were exposing her on all fronts.
Yes, I don't think that they were doing it because they were like, now she's going to be the feminist icon we know her to be.
Okay, well, the article still made me sad because, haha, Vanity Fair, it turns out that photo was empowering, you losers. I guess after this, after what they did to our friend Alexis Nyers, Vanity Fair is a menace.
So what happens is the article comes out and it kind of describes Demi as a diva, a bit difficult, and with a large entourage. I don't know that she doesn't come off as those things. At this point, She had been taken under Bruce Willis's wing. It's the first time she'd ever been on a private plane. Bruce Willis was like really living large as a 80s action star, multi-millionaire actor. She's also like a kind of fucked up person. And sometimes those people don't know how they're coming across. And sometimes the things those people do to protect themselves. Like Mariah Carey, I think would rightfully be like, oh, she was a bit of a diva. I don't think being a diva is the worst thing in the world, but you know what I mean?
And yeah, I guess I agree that she probably is cold.
I think people can be traumatized and also not necessarily as sweet as they think they are.
I'm sure she's closed off.
Yeah.
I just feel like it makes me sad looking back on it, how many stories there were that people used to sell magazines of being like, this woman is a bitch.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, you're allowed to be a bitch. You don't need all of society to hate you because you're a bitch.
Yeah.
You're also allowed to be a diva if you're like the highest person on the call sheet, making the most money and like producing the film. I don't know. You're allowed to do a lot of things, but I don't know that they walked in and made something up whole cloth.
I don't think they did.
I don't know that she was there like, well, I stay late every day just sweeping up, making sure that there's granola bars for the crew.
I feel like it's jarring in this current day and age of like sanitized, boring as fuck celebrity profiles. I feel like it is jarring sometimes when you read about the way that people like went in with an agenda. Because again, I see how you would look at her and be like, she travels with a massive entourage.
I was portrayed as selfish, egotistical, and pampered. I don't know that those things are wrong. I also don't think that makes her a bad person.
I also am wondering how many celebrities on the set of a film they're starring in wouldn't come across as like egotistical and pampered.
I agree.
Which is why I'm saying like going in with that obvious agenda is probably what led to this article.
Yeah, she says a lot of ill will would come my way from that one story, but it was also a humbling reality check. If I was somehow conveying a persona that was totally at odds with how I saw myself and who I wanted to be, then something needed to change. I guess the problem here is the whole point of this book is that Demi is such an unreliable narrator to herself.
Yeah.
That her entire family cuts her off at one point and she can't figure out why.
Yeah.
She literally is like, my family randomly stopped speaking to me for 3 years and I have truly no idea what I did.
That's so true.
So that's part of the, and I'm not saying that she's evil and she deserves hate, but I don't know that she wasn't 27 years old, the mother of a new young child, part of the most famous, powerful, rich it couple of Hollywood. I don't know that she didn't go through a bit of a diva phase.
No, I agree. I still feel like it's a bummer though to look back on these moments because of the way that men are so rarely held accountable for a diva phase. So at the same time as this Vanity Fair article is giving her horrible press, her mom is also selling stories about her and her family to the tabloids.
Her mom is also selling her own nudes to the tabloids. Like as in Ginny is taking naked photos and selling them to the tabloids.
So she ends up just having to cut her mom off. She's like, I have kids. You are making our lives worse. Like you're not just a liability for me anymore. I have children now. And if you're going to be maintaining this relationship with the tabloids, you can't be here. Something
she also alludes to here that I think was probably even a more constant pulling at her was that she was constantly being asked to bail out her mom, paying for her rehabs, paying for her plane tickets when she got stranded somewhere for some insane reason. I think it was like she was constantly doing everything she could to try to help her mom. And then she finally was like, oh, you don't want help. You want something else.
Attention.
Something I can't give you. So she had been asked to be a part of Top Gun, which she had to audition for, which she actually appreciates because she likes feeling like she earned things. So she goes in 7 months pregnant with Scout, her second baby, Scout LaRue, as we talked about, auditions for this role and gets it. Of course, she's alongside Jack Nicholson.
Oh, this is A Few Good Men.
Oh, sorry.
Tom Cruise.
I didn't know Tom Cruise was ever in more than one movie.
Yeah, he's been in like 3 or 4.
Huh. So a different Tom Cruise movie.
There's the one with Katie Holmes.
That wasn't a movie. That was Life, man. And it was too scary.
Life is like a movie for real. And then he was in the one where he goes on the ceiling and then goes down.
Mission Impossible. We saw that together.
And then he's in the one where they're on the plane.
Snakes on a plane?
No, Top Gun.
Oh, okay. That brings us back whole cloth. I thought Top Gun was
about a gun.
A Few Good Men. And also Mission Impossible. When's he wearing socks?
Oh, when he gives him the business.
Okay, Tom. So you've been around the block. You've been in a few things. Anyway, so they are in A Few Good Men.
Back when he was a homosexual.
Ooh, they're going to kill you.
I didn't hear it from me.
Okay, so she auditions and gets the part for A Few Good Men, where she has to wear like a military uniform. Here's the thing is Scout LaRue is due end of July.
Due in August, and the film was going to start in September.
I actually knew that, and I genuinely got July and August mixed up because I knew it was the month before September, and I thought that month was July.
Oh, that's so confusing. I agree.
So she is due in August, and then they start filming in September, and she literally says insanely that the timing was perfect because it gave her just enough time to get into the best shape of her life. I've never had a baby. Historically,
you should rest.
It's not the best time to get into military-like shape, but we're not like her.
So then Scout is born early.
Thank God. So it gives her even more time to get ready.
And within a week, she picks up this insane exercise regimen.
Because Scout was born early, she was born kind of tiny. And after a few weeks, she is not gaining weight at all. And Demi sort of freaks out and takes her to the doctor. The doctor then finds out that she had been breastfeeding. And because she had been working out so much, I was creating a surplus of lipase, an enzyme that breaks down fat in my breast milk. Even though Scout was nursing for hours, she wasn't growing. So basically, she was genetically passing on her anorexia to her daughter.
She was giving a weight loss enzyme to her newborn premature baby.
Because she was working out so fanatically. So what does she do? She stops nursing and goes to breast milk. I could not stop exercising. It was my job to fit into that unforgiving military uniform I'd be wearing in 2 months. Getting in shape for that movie launched the obsession with working out that would consume me for the next 5 years. I never dared let up. I mean, that is I think the definition and the depth and the horror of the mental illness of eating disorders is this idea that you could look at a little baby and say, well, more important than nurturing and caring for you is my goal weight.
And I feel like the problem is that in Hollywood, I feel like we say so much stuff about how an eating disorder is inside of your head, and not just in Hollywood, in the world. It isn't. When she is certain weights, people comment on it in a really mean way.
Yeah.
So then she does this movie called Indecent Proposal, and she's been obsessed with training, obsessed with working out as much as humanly possible. And the director sees her and goes, why are you so lean? I don't like this.
He says, finally, he spat. I don't want you looking like a fucking man. So now she's panicking and she's fighting back. She's like, I will not gain 10 pounds. You don't understand. He's insisting she gains 10 pounds. By the end of the shoot, she had put the weight on, but they were in constant fighting. And I have to say,
well, she only put the weight on because she was waking up at 2 a.m. to get in her workouts between filming. And she got so sick. She got walking pneumonia. They were like, you literally cannot work out. Because she had pneumonia, they had to take an insurance day and not shoot she got 1 day off for walking pneumonia. And she was so embarrassed about the way that the production got delayed for a day because of her, especially after the Vanity Fair article calling her a diva. She was like, fuck, I just have to work out less. And then she does end up gaining 10 pounds by the end of the movie.
Of course, the movie comes out, and like all Demi Moore movies, it's panned critically. It's a huge box office success, and she is held accountable for the way of all women. Basically, they're like, in Hollywood, women have a price. She's essentially a prop. She's being sold by her husband. She's like, I don't know. I think it's about the nuance of marriage and fantasy and the fear of marriage, and also the fact that we all have a price and money is so important. She also says, I never consciously had this thought while making the film, but I'm sure simmering away somewhere in my subconscious was the ugliest question I'd ever been asked. How does it feel to be whored up by your mother for $500? That was an indecent proposal. Our film, by contrast, was the story of a woman who was precious.
I get why, based on her trauma, this felt rational.
So then she gets pregnant again. This time she's very sick and she's struggling. Rumor is now 5. Scout is not quite 2. As a father, Bruce steps up. When she is down and out and can't take care of the children, he's in Idaho taking care of them. He is a great and loving father. And I do think her constant pregnancies is what kept the marriages together as long as it did.
Mm-hmm.
Because he did want to be there for his children.
She says that her being pregnant mixed with the amount of time that they spent separated because they were shooting in different locations is why they were married for as long as they were.
And of course, she had always had this feeling that he was cheating on her. And that was just something she was able to kind of bury. Fun fact, Meg Ryan comes up with the name Tallulah
because she liked the ooh sound from Scout LaRue and Rumor. So she needed an ooh sound. Tallulah.
She is forced to be on bed rest. It seems again like her obsessive compulsive working out is hurting the baby. They say that at one point the baby just stops growing. And they're like, I think you need to stop moving so much. So she goes on bed rest, which is tricky. But then she has Tallulah Bell, Bruce Willis, February 3rd, 1994.
I would have done anything to take care of my girls. I felt an almost primal need to protect them. I would have taken a bullet for them, robbed a bank, you name it. And so then she gets asked to do the movie Striptease, where it's a woman who is doing anything to feed her children, and she feels like she really relates to it. She also gets asked to do the movie G.I. Jane, and they're filming at the same time. So then there's this bidding war for who can pay her the most so that their movie gets to get her first. And she ends up making $12 million for Striptease. It was an unprecedented amount of money for a woman in Hollywood, even though Bruce was making over $20 million a film. The tabloids freaked out. They were like, oh my God, she's so greedy. She's so greedy. Meanwhile, her husband is making twice as much money as her, and no one bats an eye.
Of course, striptease, another hit that people pan. The feminists are mad. Those feminists, they're always fucking yapping their traps, huh?
Well, it's just interesting that the feminists are always yelling at a woman.
I do wonder how much of it was like above and beyond versus how much of it is every single action somebody's going to say something and she is just very sensitive.
I think that she's very sensitive. I also think that she, because of the way she was raised, didn't have a good understanding of feminism.
Yeah, I wouldn't vote for her to be like the leader of women.
I don't think we should pick one.
I don't think we should pick one, but if we had to, it wouldn't be her.
Yeah.
I guess everyone, democracy, baby. You guys could vote for Demi if you want to.
I think if we're going to have one person in charge of all the women to make it fair, it should be a man.
Maybe even a father of daughters. Okay, so she does these 2 movies. Both of them are about her body, essentially. For striptease, she has to get fucking rock hard and super lean because she's in her underwear all the time. She's always putting herself in these situations where she's going to be naked all film, essentially. And then being like, well, I have to starve myself so that I feel comfortable on camera. And then for G.I. Jane, she puts on like 20 pounds of rock hard muscle. She does like a full boot camp. She trains like she's actually going to be a SEAL.
And I mean, she's training with all these guys and outplanking them. She says the only thing that she couldn't do was the pull-ups. And she still could do 4.
Unfortunately, even before the movie came out, people who hadn't seen it were already slamming it. It felt like a kind of collective decision just to trash me and treat me as the joke I always feared I was.
She is feeling the weight of the way people are ripping her apart, and it doesn't occur to her that she should talk to someone. She's also just going through a lot. She's just had 3 kids. Her husband is not really in this marriage.
She gets back from G.I. Jane. It's now been 5 or 6 years of her kind of exercise bulimia. She looks at the gym and she goes, I can't do it anymore. And she just has this feeling of, I want to see what my body is supposed to look like. I'm going to eat intuitively. I'm going to stop working out extremely. I'm just going to be active and eat when I'm hungry, not eat when I'm full. She describes a lot of this intuitive eating, quote unquote, being like, if I don't want breakfast, I won't eat breakfast. And just because I'm with the kids and they're eating lunch or dinner doesn't mean I have to eat lunch or dinner. I hear a lot of like what she's not eating now that she's being intuitive about it. I don't hear her eating a lot. And shockingly, the weight came off. She weighs very little after her intuitive anti-exercise eating escapade, which she claims fixed her. I lost about 30 pounds in just over 3 months. I finally reached a truce with my body. Totally. Yeah. She is 5'5". I think that puts her about at 105 pounds. I don't know that that's exactly a truce.
I will say this is one area that feels still uninterrogated because I think it wasn't like an active ticking time bomb. By the end, where she is now, I think there was a lot of stuff that was like really weighing on her. She relapses. There's a lot going on. And so the way that she like kind of falls into this trap of being like, you know, when you heal from your eating disorder, that's how you actually get skinny.
Yeah, of
course. I'm just
like,
okay.
I think the problem is in Hollywood, the expectation of fitness makes it so that if you are not like paralyzingly obsessed with your body and food, you're just like casually starving yourself in a consistent and like a maintainable way, then they're like, well, that's a win.
Yeah. So then she gets a call that her mom is about to die.
Her mom has metastatic lung cancer.
And it spread to her brain.
At first, I thought it was a scam. She shows up without calling first, so there's no paparazzi, and there's her mom in a hospital bed in her sister's room.
She realizes that her mom had just always loved her dad, Danny, so much. Even though in the 8 years since Demi Moore stopped speaking to her mom got married 3 times.
And one of the men was so abusive, it landed her in the hospital. So she had a really hard time those 8 years.
Yeah.
She ends up spending all 3 months of her mom's hospice situation with her. She says Bruce is really incredible during this time. He's fully taking care of the kids back in Idaho and bringing them down to see her every single weekend. I guess it's pretty easy when you have a private plane.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, we've seen men with more do less. So we'll give it to him. Later in another chapter is like, during my mother's death, Bruce suggested we separate formally. And I am like, okay. So he was a really great father, except for that he fully divorced you in the 3 months where your mom was dying. I think he could have sat on it a bit.
It's a conversation that could have happened later. So then her mom passes, whatever her issues were, and God knows there were plenty, she'd taken them with her. It was a liberating moment. I was flooded with compassion for the pain she had held onto all of her life and had no way to work through or overcome. You know, that's nice. I don't care. I am like, no, her life was really hard and I feel very sad for a lot of the things she went through. I still think that if you're going to bring kids into this world, you can't sell them.
Amen. One of the things that had always frustrated me about my mom was her insistence on her own victimhood. When she was dying, for once, she really was the victim. In a way, I think it made it easier for her to be her. It certainly made it easier for me to forgive her. I started to think about the good in her. She was so creative. She was resourceful. She would be very loving and generous, always taking people in. She died at 54.
So Demi and Bruce are splitting up during this time too. He kind of makes a comment about the fact that she obviously doesn't need him there. And I will say, she says, he's right. It's a defense mechanism. I've been so used to taking care of myself that it's so much easier for me to just keep on keeping on. But I am like, well, how much did he try to enmesh their lives?
Also, she's saying the way that he didn't feel needed is stuff like he was always going on boys' nights. He's always taking movies. And she'd always say, that's fine. You can go. We'll be okay. And that made him feel unneeded. And I'm like, okay, but if you had said no, then you're clingy and unfair and demanding. I don't think that there was a way for you to win. I don't think he really wanted to be married. I think he wanted a ready-made family. I mean, everybody wants to be a dad, the best job in the world.
Exactly. And I feel like it's this thing where, yeah, he's making you give him the job instead of him taking the job. I feel like men don't understand that like being a part of a family is something that you have to pick. You're not going to get assigned dad duties. You have to just do them.
The way that some people want a country house for the weekends is what he wanted with a family. Like the fact that they all lived in Idaho and he could go do his movies and party in Vegas, party in New York, party in LA, and then just come home and not just have this gorgeous home, but a wife who will do anything for you and 3 kids who are so happy to see you. I mean, it really is like stepping into a little fantasy world where you're not held that accountable.
Yeah.
So they decide to separate and it's leaked to the press immediately, which is another blow because that means someone in their inner circle is not trustworthy. Of course, she's like, well, maybe somebody heard us at a restaurant. I don't know. Did you really carelessly talk about it in a restaurant where somebody could hear you? Probably not. I bet your mom or a family member sold it.
Everyone finds out she's getting divorced. Her mom dies. G.I. Jane comes out and people hate it.
I was totally wrung out by the end of 1998. She takes this movie in France, which she really regrets. And when she comes home, she decides, fuck it. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm done working. I just want to be with my kids. For the next 5 years, I became something I'd never been before, a full-time mom.
She's also very proud of the way her and Bruce handled their divorce. He bought a house across the street in Idaho. They really split time with the kids. They spent time as a family still a lot. It feels like their relationship hardly changed except for that he had a second house across the street.
An open wife.
Yeah, a wife that knew that they weren't together anymore.
She kind of makes some hints to the fact that I don't know that it was perfectly functional. She talks about how the girls were scared to sleep in their own room, so all 4 of them slept together for years. She became addicted to buying toys, so they just had rooms full of toys. But she made some friends. It sounds like they had a very wholesome, beautiful life, and she was able to just like sit at home and have to face herself without the distraction of constant work.
At one point, she wonders if she ever even needs to go back to work, but then Drew Barrymore calls her and is like, we wrote a role for you and you have to do it.
And her kids are like, Charlie's Angels, Mom, come on.
Can I say, best decision anyone ever made. Madison Lee, a legend.
So she goes to a dinner that her friend Sarah Foster is hosting, and who's there but Ashton Kutcher? She walks in, it's magnetic. Immediately they understand each other. She's going outside to call her kids and he pops out and says, that was the most beautiful thing I ever heard. He's in town for SNL. As soon as he's done shooting SNL, he meets up with her and they talk all night in her empty 3-floor apartment overlooking Central Park. He was 25, I was 40, but I'm telling you, we couldn't feel it. We were totally in sync.
The sense of security enabled me to be emotionally vulnerable and open in a new way.
When I met Ashton, it almost felt like a do-over. Like I could just go back in time and experience what it was like to be young with him, much more so than I'd ever been able to experience it when I was actually in my 20s.
So what do you think he was thinking?
Well, I think she says it later, and later she goes, looking back, he was able to step into my private jet, my incredible life. I was super successful in this world that he wanted to be successful in. I had this ready-made family. He really wanted a family. Like he wanted to be a dad. I think it was fun for him and overwhelming to step into this like
future version
of himself.
Yeah.
And I think she is so sexy and it was so fun. And she's pretending that she's way younger than, not pretending, but I do think she couldn't feel the age difference because she was acting 25. Unfortunately, she had the responsibilities of a 40-year-old. And there are consequences to this.
She didn't have a childhood. She was taking care of her parents. She was trying to make sure her mom didn't kill herself for her entire childhood. Finally, she gets married at 18, divorced at like 2021, engaged again. She's married with a kid by 25. She didn't have a childhood and like these fun, sexy 20s. And so she like meets Ashton Kutcher, and I feel like they were both projecting onto each other exactly what they wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think she really lets men kind of lead the dynamic. He seemed very much focused, ambitious, interested in the future. She was willing to pretend that her current future wasn't as daunting as it truly is. And I think, they're both super hot, sexy people who had great sex and enjoyed each other.
Who wouldn't?
They later opened up their relationship. I would have had a threesome with them. They never asked me, but
the phone line is still open.
Ashton, Demi, if you'd like to rekindle for one night with me, I would say yes. Especially 20 years ago. If me now could have hooked up with a 20 years ago Ashton and Demi.
Jesus Christ. People are obviously mean about it. Everyone is making fun of her for dating a younger guy. They're 16 years apart, I think.
15. But
15 years apart, which is in Hollywood a lot for a woman to be older than a man. It's the standard of a man to be older than a woman.
Mm-hmm. As she points out, Bruce has a wife that's 23 years younger than him and nobody gives a fuck.
Her agents are like, you're having this major comeback with Charlie's Angels. People are not going to take you seriously if you are publicly dating Ashton Kutcher.
But she says, this is the happiest I've ever been in my life. And we want to be in each other's lives. And we don't have to hide anything. This is serious to us. And to her, it was so serious.
I mean, they got married.
Yeah. I will say this is what we call Mariah Carey disease. When you do not have your high school, college fling young, you will have it eventually.
Yeah.
A year and a half into the relationship, Ashton's hosting SNL again. They tackle the rumors head on by doing a little joke. She's up there on a monologue. For the first time in her life, she feels confident and happy and sexy and protected. And she's having fun and she's confident. And I mean, she's just never had such a good time. I had just turned 42 and I was pregnant. So they find out that she is pregnant. This is something they had both talked about and wanted. They were like living a very wholesome life. He was basically a full-time stepfather to the girls. They all moved to LA. He was handling dinner. They were doing Kabbalah lessons on Wednesday. They had Shabbat dinner and then they would have football Sundays with it was just all of their friends. I think this was the life she had always wanted. This was like the best time in her world.
So just before she had found out she was pregnant, she started drinking a little bit again because Ashton Kutcher, they'd been on vacation and he was like, I'm 25 and I'm an expert in everything and alcoholism isn't real. So she was like, yes, probably. I was so young and so out of control then. Now I'm a mature adult and a mother. I can have just like 2 or 3 drinks and it's not that big of a deal. So she starts drinking a little bit here and there. Then she gets pregnant and of course stops drinking. But at 6 months, they lose the baby.
If you've never lost a baby, you may think of a miscarriage as not that big a deal. It's hard to remember, but I'm sure I used to feel that way too. Like it was a bit of a medical misfortune, a disappointing but not devastating setback. But when it is your baby, who you already love and think of as a member of your immediate family, it doesn't feel like a minor defeat. It feels like your child has died. I was decimated. I shifted into survival mode. I tried to allow myself to mourn, but it was so confusing. Ashton did his best to connect with me and my grief. He tried to be there for me during the miscarriage, but he couldn't really understand the feeling. First of all, he hadn't carried this baby, and second, he was in his 20s at the time. He wasn't remotely late to the game of fatherhood. His possibilities were not running out, far from it. I was suddenly acutely aware that mine were. I'd been very lucky to get pregnant naturally in my 40s. I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to do it again.
It was my fault, I felt sure. If only I hadn't opened the door to drinking, I never would have lost the baby. Even worse, I was still smoking when I found out I was pregnant, and it took me a few weeks to quit completely. Ashton, meanwhile, was back in his empire-building mode. I was just with myself, not working, replaying over and over again what I did and what I missed during my pregnancy that could have made this happen.
So they decide to get married. She throws herself into wedding planning. They get married September 24th, 2005.
This made me so sad because people obviously said they're rushing into it. You know, she's old, he's young. And she's like, no, this was a thought out thing. It didn't feel like we were rushing into anything. We were celebrating a love that had already survived trial by fire. But really, they were celebrating a love where they had experienced something terrible and he hadn't supported her.
So they had a really good couple years. They had super fun. They have this life that I was describing with celebrities. They're all playing dominoes. They're going on vacations. They've like melded their friend groups. They're in LA. They're like the talk of the town.
After she loses the baby, she starts drinking quite a lot. And she starts to worry that things are not as under control as she thinks they are.
She's also undergoing IVF and different means of having a baby. So her hormones are going crazy. Her emotions are up and down every time she gets her period. She's really hellbent on having this child in her own body. And then she's also, as Ashley said, drinking a lot.
Also, she acknowledges here that she was not as good of a parent to her other 3 children as she should have been during this time because she had been so devastated by the loss of her other pregnancy. She didn't want to be like involving the entire family in every detail of this IVF journey because she didn't want to get her daughter's hopes up. So instead, what ended up happening is she like wasn't really communicating with them. And it was like her and Ashton against the world.
I think I began to take my relationships with my daughters for granted. And as teenagers, Rumor and Scout were racing with hormones while I was pumped full of them from my IVF. So then things start to get suspicious. Ashton starts doing a movie called Spread with Jennifer Jason Leigh, who I think would also have been an older woman than him at this time. But maybe that's just because she's older now, but 20 years ago she wasn't. I don't know. Anyway, Ashton comes home and says, Jennifer feels really uncomfortable with you being on set. She thinks it's going to like inhibit our acting ability. Demi is very upset by this, calls her manager who she shares with Jennifer Jason Leigh and hears back that Jennifer Jason Leigh had never said anything like that. She's like, that's not coming from me. She realizes it's coming from Ashton. I thought I was being supportive there for Ashton and whatever he needed. I'd gone to stay with him on location a while ago. But in fact, what he needed was space and he hadn't told me. He'd only been able to communicate what he wanted by disassembling. He wasn't honest. That's on him. But I had made him the focus of all of my attention and was putting too much pressure on him and I was losing myself and that's on me.
So then she starts like kind of getting sloppy drunk at times and Ashton is furious with her and she's like, well, what the fuck?
You're the one who told me I should be able to drink and have fun. And now that I'm drinking and having fun and albeit sometimes blacking out and passing out in bodies of water that people have to rescue me from and like getting sick, now you're mad. It seemed like a good-natured joke at the time, but really he was just shaming me.
So then she gets a little bit addicted to Vicodin after a dental surgery. And she's like, okay, I have to quit this stuff cold turkey. So she goes through opiate withdrawal.
Alone at home.
Alone. And then he gets home and she's like, okay, I did it. And he's like, okay.
When Ashton returned home, I felt like I'd lived through a war. He did not offer me any reinforcement or compassion. I felt like he was angry with me for having this problem in the first place. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it.
So then he's like, you know what? We need threesomes.
And so she says, okay, she wants to make him happy. And she's like, those 2 women I still like. Shout out to those ladies.
Shout out to those ladies. I wish it was Claire.
However, yeah. Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
However, then he cheats on her because he's like, oh my God, I got so confused because we were having those threesomes. So I was like,
yeah, that's not confusing. And these are the women he's getting caught cheating with, right? So in the course of the relationship, there's 2 public cheating scandals that hit the tabloids because these women sold their stories. So Lord knows who kept it quiet. But this girl specifically is somebody who had given him her number while they were all out bowling. So Demi had been there. That girl had been there with her mom. And she's like, the fact that he would have sex with this woman that I publicly was like, I can't believe that girl just hit on you in front of me was such a slap in the face. She puts on a brave face and she doesn't deny it, but she does not speak about it. And she realizes that was a mistake. I cheated my children out of the opportunity to process this upset with me as a family. They deserve to know the truth. Because at this point, the 5 of them are quite a tight-knit step family. And publicly, their mom is being cheated on. Ashton did not compensate for his behavior by being extra solicitous and kind. In retrospect, I think all of this was his way of trying to get out of the marriage. He didn't know how to do it in a loving way, or maybe he was too conflicted. I think part of him cherished what we had. Part of him couldn't wait to move on. You can't blame someone for not having the skills or the level of awareness it takes to behave compassionately. That was the best he could do.
I understand her not wanting to hold a grudge, and you can't blame someone for not being compassionate. But this whole thing of like, oh, he was just trying to get out of the marriage and he was a young guy. He didn't know how to express his feelings. Well, he was old enough to marry you and become a stepdad. Like, he wasn't incapable. At this point, he's probably 30.
They met when he was 25. They dated for 2 years and this was like 4 or 5 years into their relationship. So he's like in his early 30s. I'm about his age and I know not to cheat just to get somebody to divorce me.
I would say by the time they met, they were past the phase where you're allowed to just like act like an asshole to make someone else do the dumping.
Anyway, so now it's 2011, the spring. Only one of her children still at home. Scout's at Brown. Rumors being an actress. Sure. We'll say that. Tallulah says she's going to practice her SATs with her friends and she gets caught and busted for underage drinking and brought down to the station. Once there, Demi goes to pick her up and her primary concern is, can we not make this public? This will be on our record forever. Even if it's expunged at 18, it'll always be Googleable. And Demi goes into kind of PR mood. She says, I didn't hug Tallulah when I first saw her at the station and maybe I should have. I was upset that she had lied to me and I was focused on trying to convince the cops to keep this quiet. I was trying to protect her. She interpreted that as me caring only about how the whole thing looked. I will say this in Demi's defense from Tallulah, there's always that thing where you're like, Well, it was different for me. It was worse for me. Actually, Tallulah, I had very unfamous parents. I had deeply unfamous parents. I can tell you for sure, if at 17 I had been arrested and they had to come pick me up at the cop station, they would not have met me with a hug.
Oh
I think every parent in America would be pretty fucking pissed at their child for getting arrested.
Especially just how it looked. Like my parents, it would not have been in the global tabloids.
Yeah.
But my town's police blotter, let me tell you the way people fucking devoured that thing every Thursday. Finding a name you recognize in the police blotter, talk of the goddamn town.
I'm sorry your mom didn't show up and hug you when you broke the law and got caught and acted a fool. She's not one of your friends. She's not there for you. She's going to be pissed. That's actually the most normal mom reaction I've ever fucking heard.
Yeah, so then she goes home. Her daughter goes to stay with Bruce and his girlfriend.
And she goes to a charity event. And she goes, okay, maybe I shouldn't have gone. Maybe we should have worked through it. I will say, there you are right.
Yeah.
You don't just abandon your teenage daughter with no parents in sight after she's gotten in trouble. You stay home to ground her ass.
You stay home to ground her ass. But the other thing is I feel like Demi is short-sighted in being like, it is either the event or the exact aftermath of the event for why my daughter didn't speak to me for a couple of years. It was probably accumulation of a lot of, like, I don't think replaying the events of that weekend will really hit the nail on the head of exactly why your daughter stopped talking to you for 3 years.
So Ashley kind of spoiler alerted it, but after she gets back from this charity event, she sees a note from her daughter saying, I'm moving out. We're not speaking. And nobody took Demi's side. Suddenly, Scout didn't want to talk to me either. Mysteriously, she too needed space. Bruce refused to discuss the situation with me or negotiate with an appropriate way of addressing what had happened. I was being treated like the one who had been picked up in the Hollywood from the police. It was baffling. And she goes, of course, everyone had their reasons. Scout was trying to separate in college. Bruce was starting a new life with his new wife. Tallulah was angry about being told what to do. I think part of the real reason was that the girls were angry I'd become so dependent on Ashton. I was addicted to him. That's the best way I can put it. And I did all the things that addicts do. I prioritized my addiction over my needs and the needs of my family.
That feels true.
I made strange, unconvincing justifications for my behavior and his. I had held the family together as a pillar and the pillar was crumbling.
So then her and Ashton start talking about using an egg donor because their IVF attempts have been unsuccessful. They find someone they like. They start filling out the paperwork. Days later, he goes, actually, I think we should break up.
And she's like, why did you let me go through with this? It had been really hard for her to commit to the idea of using an egg donor. This felt like such a concession to him that he was excited about. And he goes, I don't know, I didn't think you'd go through with it.
I guess I feel like the fact that he obviously wanted out of this marriage, I understand how hard it is to like stop a woman in her tracks when she's like problem solving on all fronts about like how to get pregnant. But I feel like to let her go through all of this exploration and like rounds and rounds of IVF.
Especially because she had already had 3 children. There was like a middle ground where you could go, let's like put this on hold. I don't know if this is what I want.
Yeah.
They very much could have had a relationship without kids. That wasn't a given. So I don't know why he let her just like toil away in this misery.
Yeah.
So then he's like, I would like to move out. She begs him not to. She says, listen, let's just keep it between us. Let's try to work on it. Let's go to therapy. She's desperate to keep him in. She goes to New York to work on something. And as she's getting her hair and makeup done, tabloid, Ashton has cheated again. The woman has sold her story. Demi has to go and walk the red carpet an hour after hearing this news.
And she calls him to be like, you know what? You could have just like manned up. The fact that you're doing this to me, cheating on me publicly, like cheating on me with girls who are going to sell their story to the tabloids, like you can tell who's discreet. Fuck you, man.
A week after my 49th birthday on 11/11/11, Ashton moved out. They do a joint statement. Part of the painful part of this was he had cheated the weekend of their anniversary where they had had a very lovely time. I feel like that's the worst mindfuck of it all. It's like one thing for a cheating scandal to come out when things are really bad, but for you to think things are good.
Yeah, for you guys to be like submitting paperwork to get an egg donor.
I couldn't eat. I shrank down to 96 pounds, skeletal. I started getting blinding headaches. My body hurt all over. All I could think was, how did I get here? I went away with Rumor for Christmas. I was not in a good place and I behaved badly. So this is truly like 1 or 2 months after they had announced their separation. Things are going badly. She starts to misuse migraine medication. She's at a party in January with Rumors and both of their groups of friends. She does whippets and then something called spice, which is like man-made weed. And that's when she has this seizure. Before she can tell everyone, no, don't call the police, they call an ambulance. And of course, the news is out. Demi hospitalized, drug use. Rumor was completely freaked out. And after that night, she joined her younger sisters in refusing to speak to me. I wonder if she said, you have to go to rehab. And Demi said no. Because I do feel to be doing drugs next to your mom and then get mad at your mom is not fair.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's like a piece missing here of her being like, you have to get help, and her being like, I don't need help. And then her being like, well, then I'm not talking to you.
She says that her kids wanted her to go to rehab and then she wouldn't. But then she does go to rehab and she invites them to family day and they won't come.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would like pay so much money to get a transcription of these conversations, because the way that she says that she was just calling and reaching out and begging and saying like, what can I do? Like, I'll do anything. I'm going to therapy. I'm going to rehab. I'm doing everything. Please talk to me. And they wouldn't. What happened here?
I guess when you look at the time frame of this book, those 6 years with Ashton do kind of go by in a bit of a blur, because I think for so many of those years she was happy. But I wonder if it was 6 years of like actually a horrible time for her kids.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was like he was a good dad as much as he could be, but at the end of the day, the kids were neglected for 6 straight years, and then this was just like more than they could handle.
Yeah.
And she had been drinking a lot the whole time, and it seems like she had been on biking. And I know she's very honest and vulnerable in this book, but I think it's hard to express the pain that your family's going through if for 6 months they're watching you have an opiate addiction, watching you have a drinking problem for 5 years, feeling neglected because of your hot new boyfriend who's only a few years older than your daughter.
Also, I feel like then to hit that point where the hot new boyfriend leaves you, and then now you're like acting like you have nothing to live for when you have these 3 daughters right there.
So I think if we heard it from their perspective, there'd be more understanding of just how much pain this had caused everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I had a choice. I could die alone like my dad, or I could really ask, how did I get here, and have the courage to face the answers. And then she goes through and she's like, how did I get here? And she's like, look at my family, look at my life, look at what I was raised with, look at the choices I've made.
I got here because I tried so hard to be different from my mom that I took care of everyone but myself. I pushed and pushed and pushed myself to be the mom my girls needed, the wife Bruce and then Ashton wanted. But what did I need? What did I want? It was nobody's job but mine to figure out and then demand it. And it was nobody's job to convince me that I deserved it. So she starts realizing, and she spends a couple of years, it seems like, in pretty intensive therapy. I had no choice but to stop and learn for the first time how to digest. She has spent her entire life on the run, then saving her family, like saving her parents, saving her mom, then married again, then a mom of 3, then married again. Like, she has not processed a single thing this entire time.
I got here because from day one, I've been wondering, is it okay that I'm here? And it was finally time for me to tell myself yes. So she got treatment for the trauma I'd never faced and the codependence that arose from it. And she says, a lot of the drinking problems and a lot of the drug problems were really like symptoms, not the disease. I don't know if she's drinking anymore, but I think she's probably just sober. But then for years, they would not speak to her. She asked them to go to family day. They said no. She reached out repeatedly after she completed the program. Nobody would answer her. It hurt me and it made me mad, but that time with just myself was incredibly empowering. It gave me the chance to learn what life is as just me, not as a mother or a daughter, not a wife or a girlfriend, not as a sex symbol or an actress. I sat through not getting a call on Christmas, not getting a calls on my 50th birthday or Mother's Day, no email, nothing, not one thing. When I had nothing left to lose, I could finally exhale, stop gripping. I don't think my instinct for caretaking would have allowed me the space I need to heal. Maybe I needed to be alone to do it.
I got here because I needed all of this to become who I am now. I'd been holding on to so many misconceptions about myself all my life, that I wasn't valuable, that I didn't deserve to be anywhere good, whether that meant in a loving relationship on my own terms or in a great film with actors I respected who knew what they're doing. The narrative I believed was that I was unworthy and contaminated, and it wasn't true.
This doesn't mean that now I'm Saint Demi and I have no pain. It just means that I can finally admit that I have weaknesses and needs, and that it's okay to ask for help. I can't fix everything. I can feel sorrow and self-doubt and pain and know that those are just feelings, and like everything else in this life, they will pass. And then she's like, isn't there an easier way to learn this though? But she goes, well, this is my story. And I wanted to tell the story because it's mine, not my boyfriend's, not my husband's, not my children's. It's mine alone. I'm the only one who was there for all of it. And the second reason is that even though it's mine, maybe some part of the story is yours too.
We all suffer, we all triumph, and we all get to choose how we hold both.
And that's just a little epilogue being like, my children are back in my life. I'm a much better mother. I'm much stronger. I'm much happier. We all love each other so much. I have friends. I love Idaho. And it got better.
Yay.
Ashley, how fertile is this soil?
Oh, 5.
Yeah. I like on rereading, it is one of the better celebrity memoirs.
How many wormtinis?
0.
How many mocktail wormtinis?
Still 0. I don't really feel like I need to know her, actually.
Yeah.
I like kind of have no personal interest in being her friend. She stresses me out, but I think she did a good job with her book.
Yeah. And
I wish her the best.
I'm rooting for her. And not Ashton. Fuck that guy. And do you know who not fuck?
Who?
Our 5-star reviewing wormies.